Hi, everyone. I'm Summer,
I'm Carrie.
and this is Hopelexia Podcast.
Join us to talk about sex, drugs, and self-improvement.
Psychopathy is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and the time to treat a neurodevelopmental disorder is in childhood. If you don't identify them before they are 3, you are too late.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying like too late in the sense that nothing can ever be done, right? But you have missed that optimal window of the least amount of fuckery for everybody.
Right.
I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous because all of the experts, every single person who, is in the realm of psychopathy that I've ever talked to or read, and I've read hundreds of neuroscience research papers on this. I've read, just about every book out there on it, right? Like I read a ton on this stuff, and everybody says early intervention, early intervention, early intervention. And instead, what the clinicians say is, well, I don't want to label them.
I don't want to label it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is we don't have an understanding. I mean, we can't even convince people that this is neurodevelopmental, right? And so there's not, so like my daughter was really in an ideal scenario as far as should have been able to identify and provide intervention, in that she was born into the foster care system. Like we were already fostering her older sister. So she did go home with her mother from the hospital. They had parenting supports in that house. They were seeing her every day. They were being monitored. So there's not been any evidence of abuse or neglect in those in that time frame. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but but those behaviors that she was exhibiting, like she was a quote unquote good baby, right? She never cried. She wanted to just sit over in the corner, and she didn't want to interact with anybody. Like the first time my then husband met her, she was, I believe, 3 months old, which is the time, they're usually looking at your face and they're kind of interacting. She didn't want to do any of that, even that early. But because even people who are supposed to be trained for child development and child safety didn't realize that to recognize these things as, okay, these are indicators that maybe we need to be looking at things. And I had been pointing them out because I just researched a lot, and before I certified as a foster home, I had connected with tons of people about in the adoption world and all that, back in the day of message boards before social media existed,
right?
And so I knew about RAD, right? Reactive attachment disorder. So I wanted to make sure, because I'm like, you guys are monitoring them, so there may be a possibility of removing her. Like, we need to make sure, we're doing everything we can to make sure that we don't cause these, these disruptions, as few as possible to develop RAD. Which later, when she was removed, it wasn't even something related to her. It was, an arrest unrelated that made her mother unavailable for her care.
Right. Can we address RAD for a second here?
Sure.
And so, because I don't know who's coming to the podcast with what knowledge. So do you want to explain what RAD is, or do you want me to?
Either way. I think I've explained it multiple times on the podcast, so if you want to go for it, I'll let you do it.
Okay, so RAD stands for reactive attachment disorder. And there are a bunch of symptoms, but this is a really, really key point that I'm about to make. And this is something that I really, really need parents to understand. You can only get reactive attachment disorder or the child, I guess, can only get this if there was a break in caregiving between 9 months of age and 5 years. That's it. You can't have this any other way. And I cannot tell you how many clinicians have diagnosed children with reactive attachment disorder who are in the homes of their biological mother from whom they have never been away.
So what are they
Like,
reacting to? Right? Because
right,
that's the whole point. It's reactive. It's supposed to be, because
right,
of that trauma. And that's the
right.
thing when my daughter first, when she came to live with me, she was 5 years old. First thing I did was got her involved, in intake for the therapist. Um, because, I'm seeing behaviors that are not typical, but she always pretended to be happy and things like that. I'm like, this isn't
Right.
normal. There's not a normal range of emotion here. So let's look at this. And that was the first thing they did, was diagnose with reactive attachment disorder, which I get, right? Because you just assume because she's in care and all of that. But the reality is her behaviors and her symptoms far predated
Yeah.
when she changed caregivers at 2 years old.
Yeah. And that's something, by the way, I was actually thinking about that last night too, is how many, how many people that's true for, right? Like, and thinking, about trauma and stuff, because the impetus is to always blame this on trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And side note, sort of interrupting myself here, I have to say it drives me absolutely batty when, these websites or experts or whatever, they always start like, what causes conduct disorder? Abuse and trauma. And then sometimes nothing causes it. I'm like, great. So if anybody can get it and it has nothing to do with trauma. You can't say trauma creates this. And then sometimes it happens to people who has no trauma. Like,
Right.
what? Like, how does that even make any sense? And, at all? It's absolutely ridiculous. But back to, the reactive attachment disorder, like oh, right. That's what so there are so many people, right, where there are, there might be a trauma or something, not ideal, whatever that comes along when they're, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, what have you. But their behaviors were there before that trauma ever happened, yet the adults around them will still blame their behaviors on the trauma. And that's, I mean, it's
And I'm
utterly
guilty.
ridiculous.
And I'm guilty. I attributed a lot of her behaviors as she was older. Well, once she moved in with me and she's school aged, I attributed a lot of that to trauma, and the disruption in the system involvement, because I didn't understand that the connection between those behaviors in infancy and toddlerhood,
Right.
because I wasn't educated on how that develops and what that looks like as it's developing. And in some ways, I probably, because I know I defended a lot of the things she did, because like at school and things like that, in talking to the teachers, I'm like, yeah, but there's this trauma, and so she's going to react this way. And so we're all approaching it from this trauma position, thinking, well, if we can just, give the supports for the trauma, it's going to fix. And because of that, they didn't necessarily do like law enforcement referrals or things like that, where maybe they should have, it might have, been able to help us access, get that judge to order some intervention. But because we were approaching it from the standpoint of this is the result of her trauma, which, as we found out later, as she got older, she didn't even identify those things as traumatic. So,
Right. I mean, that's something that I don't think, so people don't think about that aspect of trauma, right? That two people can go through the exact same thing. One of them comes out traumatized and the other is completely unfazed. Right. And it's not something that we talk about at all.
Right. because we think of things as, I think it's that we want things to be clear cut, right? A, B, C, and D events are traumatic events. Well, no.
Right.
Trauma is when, our nervous system is overwhelmed, and I can go through something and it not be traumatic. Same, the next person might go through it and it's horrifically traumatic, or the other way around. It's
Right.
not this bright line like we want to think it is.
No, it's really not. I mean, nobody ever takes a baseline before. There was a study that was done in an emergency room.
Mhm.
And one of the things that they did was they did skin conductance tests on each of the people who had come through the ER who had just been subjected to some sort of trauma. And they were able to predict with a scary amount of accuracy for science who was going to end up having PTSD and who was not,
Oh, wow.
based on how their skin conducted the electricity. I mean, people don't really stop to think about that, like that aspect from like, oh my God, blah, 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 A, B, C, or D is so traumatizing. Well, for some people,
Right.
for other people, it might not be. Actually, I think we talked about this, right?
Mhm.
Like, Summer, you and I could go up on stage in front of a bajillion people and give a talk about something and we would be fine. If we made Carrie get up and get on that stage, she would come away, she'd be
Right.
so traumatized because she'd be like, I didn't want to, you know what I mean? Like, oh my
Right.
God. Like, it's all so individual and so subjective, and people they really just want to. Actually, you know what? The damnedest thing just occurred to me.
What?
We don't want to label anything. We don't want to label children, but we'll label everything trauma. Like,
Right.
what? How do you not want to label children, but you want to label trauma?
Well, and I think part of
Right?
it comes to the stigma. That's what I keep hearing is you can't use that word. I get comments all the time on TikTok about how I shouldn't be using the term psychopathy because of the stigma. And I'm like, do you realize that every person she has mistreated, like, they feel that way because of her actions, not because it was called psychopathy, right? Like, but we need to start being honest about what this stuff is, and calling it conduct disorder doesn't change what we're dealing with. We're talking about things in euphemisms instead of addressing and looking
Agree.
at. And we need to, like you mentioned earlier, not all people with psychopathy are violent. Not all engage in criminal activity. And because of which we'll talk about it on another episode, when we talk about the diagnostic paradigm. But right now there is only a diagnosis for people who are engaging in that criminal activity, which means we're only looking at that group instead of the entire spectrum. How are we supposed to understand something, let alone develop diagnostics or interventions for them, when we're ignoring a huge chunk of that population?
Right. I mean, and the other point I would make too is if we wait until they're violent, it's too late.
It's too late, right?
Like, no. It's like, I don't know. I was going to come up with some snazzy analogy, but that didn't happen.
Well, and I think that's one important thing, we've been talking about why it's important to talk about, but this is a public health issue, really. Like, socially, the social impact is huge. I know that the fact sheet on psychopathy says people with, which of course we'll go over statistics more later, but the one that always sticks in my head is people with psychopathy are responsible for 30 to 40% of violent crimes, which is a big number when you consider people with psychopathy are a small portion of the population. Like 70% of people have no traits of psychopathy at all.
I thought,
that's from that fact sheet. I am not a researcher. I did not come up with those numbers.
Sure.
And we'll look at those deeper later. But yeah, we're still talking it relative to the whole population. It's a small portion, It's not a tiny portion. It's big enough we need to pay attention.
Yeah.
But like per capita, those that are engaging in violence are responsible for a big amount of the violence that we're experiencing societally. We can't keep pretending it's not happening. Or, oh, we're just addressing it one individual at a time.
No. Yeah, I mean, and there are a whole bunch of reasons why we don't address it, which we'll address on later episodes of the podcast for sure. But I mean, and it's unfortunate when we sort of focus on this one demographic, and I completely understand why we have focused on the criminal demographic. There are a number of reasons, and the first and probably most important of which is they're a captive audience, right? And so typically speaking, people with psychopathy do not participate in research, right? Like what's in it for them? Nothing.
Right.
And I mean, it's, as an aside, I mean, and I understand why the IRB exists, and I understand that they have to, like, you know, they definitely, like, you need to have some sort of oversight on what the experiment is and what the research is. And, you know, I mean, like, even with, even with like fMRI stuff, you still have to like have this informed consent, even though there's, almost zero chance anybody ever get hurt laying there in an MRI. Like, it's not, I mean, okay, if you had some metal and you didn't know that, sure, that could go poorly, but that's, sort of normal. Like, we have to get IRB approval for answering a bunch of questions on a piece of paper or, computer screen. And so I understand that, but, and I understand why we shouldn't, under normal conditions, incentivize this kind of research for the participants to the point where they might submit to something that could cause them harm, right? But on the other hand, when you're dealing with an entire population whose main battle cry is what's in it for me, why don't you make it worth their while and then we can study them, right? Like, they're very, very transactional, and we want them not to be that way. In order to figure out how to not, have them not be that way, we need to give a little, right? We need to get into that transactional sort of a thing. And I mean, this is a little flippant and tongue in cheek, but like, you could be like, hey, kids, would you, participate in this research? You'll get a free gaming system. And then they'll be like, yeah, I'll do it. Right. But there has to be, when you're dealing with a population that is, historically, altruism averse, right? Like, why would they do that sort of thing? And we do need the research, and we do need stuff to happen. But I think even before that, people need to understand the reality. People need to understand that, kids come out this way. They just do. There was a recent study done by Rebecca Waller and her team at UPenn, and I'm going to grossly, sort of be reductive about the study rather than trying to kind of go into the nitty gritty of it. But essentially what they found is, and they started following these parents when they were during the gestational period. And so they were, looking at prenatal stuff, and then they followed the whole cohort all the way on to 3 years of age, and the fMRI results at 1 year of age were predictive of callous, unemotional traits at 3. Or said another way, and I should, like, basically it's kind of proof positive that this is a biological thing, right? This is how they came out. And we're never supposed to say a child was born that way, like, heaven forbid. I mean, and I think a whole
yeah, I used the phrase "born with psychopathy" on one of the TikTok videos when I was talking about my daughter, and woohoo, I made people angry.
Oh no,
they were in my comments. Let me tell you. Well, okay, has exhibited oh, nobody's born this way. You're lying. You're a terrible person. You must have done something to her. And I'm like, okay, do you prefer the phrasing has exhibited symptoms since birth? Because she has. And then, no, people were not happy with that either, and started calling me a psychopath and a narcissist. And it was a fun weekend. But yeah,
This is a perfect point, I think, at which to segue into one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about the case about the murder of Jamie Bolger. And it's interesting because so many people well, if you're going out and speaking publicly about your child who did this, clearly you are a narcissist and you just want all this attention, right? Like that's what they say and think and feel. I mean, I lost friends over, how I shouldn't be talking about this because it's personal. Like, no, I'm talking about this because nobody else is talking about it. And I'm tired of cleaning up the mess, right? Like I'm tired of humanity losing amazing people because they were murdered. I'm tired of, people being sick because they've been, in a house with somebody with psychopathy and their health has failed, right? Like there's so much damage that are done. I mean, and I do have to say, right, the other thing is, what's the impact of bullying in childhood, right? That has long-term impacts on the, on not future generations, but, their whole lives, right? And you can't, it's not, the damage cannot be undone, right? I mean, I love to do polls, asked, on average, how many victims does your child have in any given time period? And I think the 6 to 12 victims per, per, it was either year or month. I mean, it was an insane number though, right? It's like, sometimes those things measure, in days, right? And, like you guys were saying, it's something that we don't deal with until it's somebody who isn't living under the same roof as the family, right? Nobody cares until it happens to them. And it's, this is a problem. It has always been a problem and it will always remain a problem. And one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting about the manner in which John Venable's mother and Robert Thompson's mother were treated, so Ann Thompson and Susan Venables, one of them, and oh, by the way, super interesting fun fact. If you knew all of the facts of that case, and I were to tell you that one of those children would grow up to continue to be a public safety problem, you would probably never guess which one. Hint, it's not the one who grew up in the bad neighborhood getting the tar beat out of him every day.
Right.
Turns out he actually grew up kind of okay. It was the other guy who, had the parents from the higher socioeconomic status and, and that poor mother of Jamie Bolger, like she has to keep going to the media and being like, this guy is dangerous. He's dangerous. He's dangerous. He's dangerous. I mean, he was caught with, I think, thousands of child sex abuse material things, and it has not gone well for him. But during the trial, and I really wish I had taken notes or at least noted where I heard this, like what the name of the program was or whatever. I saw it a couple of years back, so I watch a lot of stuff about, sort of in the realm of psychopathy. So sometimes I can't necessarily remember every single thing off the top of my head as to where I found it. But there was somebody who was talking about that, and he was saying that during the trial of the two boys, and This is what I was looking for last night. I was trying to find, because I couldn't remember which mother got which treatment, and I wanted to be clear about that. So I might have the moms flip-flopped, but I think it was Susan Venables who was the more put together, and Ann Thompson who was the less put together one. But anyway, it doesn't matter. One of the mothers, right, did what I mean, at least from my perspective, if you have a court date, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to dress up. Not like dress up, put on a ball gown, but like you wear professional clothing. You make sure your hair is brushed, and, dressing in such a way that you are telegraphing to the judge and the jury that you are taking this very seriously, right? If you show up like in baggy sweats with stains all over them, that's not a good look. So during the trial, these two mothers, they're both excoriated by the press. I mean, just so bad, so badly. And I'm sure people are going to comment. People are going to comment and be like, well, one of the boys went through this, one of the boys went through that, and this mother did this, this mother did that. Like, okay, fine. I'm not going to dispute any of the facts of, the maltreatment that happened in both boys' lives. And I'm not trying to minimize that, but regardless of what happened with the boys, right? I mean, first of all, I don't even think anybody knew I don't think the press necessarily knew the things that the parents, did to sort of, traumatize. And I'm air quoting traumatize, because like we talked about, trauma is a very, personally subjective thing. And so, and some of the boys, one of the boys, oh my God, I mean, like, I think he was like, he was truant at a really young age. He was pulling the heads off of pigeons, just snapping them off. I mean, this happened at a really young age. But when the mothers appeared in court, and again, I don't think we had any of the family history at this point, the mother who had done her makeup and, made an effort to look nice, at one point she was being interviewed by the person on camera, and she started crying. And so she gasp, took a moment to fix her makeup because her mascara was running. And immediately, oh, look at what an attention seeker she is. Look at what a narcissist is. Like, she is. All she cares about is how she looks on camera. Oh my God, I can't believe she's fussing with her makeup. And
I mean, that's something a lot of us would do without even thinking.
And have these big black streaks. Right. Yeah. I mean, that is an excellent point. I didn't even think of that. You're right. It would be completely reflex to us. I mean, it's, wow, good call. I didn't even,
especially if you wear makeup all the time.
Right.
I mean, I do that just like if you wouldn't even necessarily think it through. You just do it out of reflex. But they called her a narcissist for that?
I don't remember if it was, I don't know if they actually used the word narcissist, but it definitely, like, all she cares about is how she looks on camera. She's getting off on the publicity, all of that stuff. Like, really? Like, and here's the messed up thing, right? If she had not blotted away the mascara and instead had these streaks, they would have immediately said she doesn't care about her appearance at all. Which is like, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And then,
right.
The other mom who was not as well put together, it was, she's a slovenly, unengaged parent who can't be bothered to, look decent for court, right? I mean, it didn't matter what these women did. They were wrong just for, being women. They didn't go after the dads, as far as I know, right? It was...
Oh, it's always
the mother, ain't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, always.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And to be sure you never miss an upload, make sure you turn your notifications on. And please come join us on social media so we can continue these conversations in between episodes. You'll find us at Hypoxia Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.